everyone, and welcome to the Compassionate Cowgirl Show, where I teach you how to connect with your horse using compassion, innovation, and self-awareness. And this is part of the Mystic series, where I demonstrate these concepts using Mystic, a previously wild, untrainable Mustang from South Steens, Oregon. So let's go ahead and dive into today's work. So this is going to be the show for you if you have ever had issues catching your horse. I know that this problem can be super frustrating, especially when we're in a hurry to get to that trail ride or horse show, or just spending the time we do have away from work with our horse. So what I'm going to be going over today is how I taught Mystic to be caught. I don't really like that word. How to get connection with them right from the beginning. So that's what I'll be demonstrating with Mystic. The goal is to have a horse who not only is not just tolerant of being caught. That's not what we really want. We want a horse who actually enjoys training time, right? And comes up to us to interact and really seeks us out, like Zeus here is doing. So that's the game plan. Now we're gonna start, I have a very itchy zebra demanding pets here. We're gonna start by going to my office and talking about kind of the theory behind how this is gonna work. And then we're gonna see it in action with Mystic out in the field, and then finally we're going to meet over a cup of tea and we're going to talk about how this lesson is going to apply to yourself as well, because true connection with horses or other humans always starts with connecting with ourselves first. So that is where we see lasting transformation. Now, before we dive in, I want to share a very kind testimonial with you guys. And looks like Zeus is demanding some more scratches here before we get started. You can see he's quite enjoying himself. All right, so anyways, back to the testimonial, if he'll let me grab my phone out for a second. So this testimonial is from Angela. Angela says, as a non-trainer taking on a Mustang to train, it has been quite the journey. An emotional roller coaster, 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. The way you teach and the time you put into this site, your website, and your videos is just crazy and amazing. It's hard for me to learn by watching, because so often I will watch a video of someone and they will work on this or that and they show you how to do it. And that is it, not you. You literally tell us what you are doing every step of the way. I never have to wonder. I wonder why she sent him off that time, but not this time. I'm a why person, because you are always educating. I can't even tell you how much I have learned in just the short time following you here and on your case studies. So thank you, Angela. Angela is a member of the Academy membership, and I have so enjoyed having her on there, and actually had the pleasure of meeting her at a horse fair that we did recently. She came and helped us out. So thank you, Angela, for all the time you put in with your Mustang and for allowing me to help you along your journey. All right, so with that, I think we're ready to go ahead and get to it. I'll see you guys in just a moment in the office. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the different approaches for catching your horse. Now, in our last episode, we talked about the different ways of motivating our horses, primarily positive and negative reinforcement. So with negative reinforcement, we commonly will use a technique called round penning to get the horse to face up and build draw and get the horse to follow us. With positive reinforcement, we want to accomplish the same, but without necessarily adding pressure like we would using the round penning technique. So in teaching the horse to face up in the round pen, what you want is the horse to be looking at you, and once they're looking at you and stay focused on you, you can kind of move around around and influence their movement to get just a single step forward towards you, and then you kind of give them a break and release, and then you start shaping that so that you get a few more consistent steps to where the horse is actually following you. And they learn that the human is the release of pressure. It creates this magnetic pull on the human and kind of a negative charge on the rest of the round pen. One of the ways that this is done is by making the human a place of rest and the area around the round pen is a place of work. So if the human loses the horse's attention and loses them facing up, then the human will send them out into the round pen and ask them to work. The horse is always going to choose the lowest energy pathway, and being a prey animal especially, they really want to conserve their energy. So they're always going to be looking at where can I get not just a release of pressure, which they get from looking at the human, but also where is that lowest energy pathway. So that is kind of the technique of round penning in a nutshell, but with Mystic, we don't have a round pen. So obviously we're going to have to look at a different technique. Because if you don't have a round pen, your only other option really is to do it from horseback. So I don't know if you guys ever saw Monty Roberts' documentary of gentling a wild horse in the wild, but he kind of used the technique he would have used in a round pen, but did it in a big open area by riding a ridden horse and then working the horse you would have been working in the round pen from his ridden horse. Now with some horses, and if the trainer is skilled enough in their feel, you can use what's called the approach and retreat method to approach the horse and not have to send them out into work. So you can imagine approaching a horse with these imaginary rings projecting off of them. That's what I call kind of their personal space boundary, their threshold. If you cross a ring or a threshold and that was kind of their boundary of where they felt comfortable, they're going to leave and run away. So if you're approaching a horse in a big area or in the round pen, I'm always thinking about thresholds and the approach and retreat. You want to think about approaching the edge of their threshold and not going past where they feel comfortable. So you're going to approach that ring, that threshold, and then retreat, and then come back, and eventually you'll work your way to the next threshold and then retreat. So it's a bunch of approaching and retreating. Every retreat you make is telling the horse that, hey, I heard you, I understand you're not quite comfortable with me getting that close, that's okay, I'm going to leave. And you're also rewarding them through negative reinforcement, the release of pressure, mental pressure in this case. So with some horses, you can approach a difficult to catch horse using that method and build some draw and don't have to worry about sending the horse around, especially if you're in a big area. So that's a way that I've addressed some difficult to catch horses out in a big area. But with Mystic, we're going to be using positive reinforcement, and what we can do with this too is that rather than us approaching Mystic, Mystic is actually going to approach us. So the approach and retreat method is great, and you can supplement with the clicker if you're trying to approach the horse. But I've found for horses who are more standoffish or more introverted, two of my Mustangs, Turk and Amira, are this way, is that it's much easier to use the target training and get them to come to me versus me going out to go get them. And every day I kind of need to acknowledge these thresholds of where they're at. I can't just walk right up to them because they are introverted and their personal space boundary is really big. So the positive reinforcement training ends up being a quicker way to go catch your horse too, so that you're not having to work through each of those thresholds every time you go and get them. And instead of you approaching the horse is approaching you. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this in action, how we're going to use positive reinforcement to build a connection with Mystic, who has been previously very hard to catch. So with that, I'll see you guys out in the field in just a moment. All right, so let's go ahead and head into Mystic's pen. So this is the field that she had let herself into. And there she is. And so she has access to this whole field. And then you guys can see my team of Mustangs and zebras are right over there. And then our neighbors' horses are back there on the other side. But what I'm gonna do is she's already kind of up in her training area where I've been working with her, but I want to show you guys, like we talked about, how to catch her using positive reinforcement. So it's going to be different, obviously, since we don't have a round pen. So instead, what you'll see me doing when I go in here is I'm going to grab my target. I have this feed pan, and I'm going to work on her just looking towards me, looking towards the target, clicking, and then treating. But the problem is, if you have a horse who isn't getting close enough to you to even hand feed, then that's when the feed pan comes into play, which I talk about in my training videos and things like that, how this is a really useful tool when you're starting out anyways. So I'm going to demonstrate that, but Mystic is already has gotten really good with this. So I'm just going to demonstrate first with the feed pan, and then you'll see me just hand feeding her, and we'll go ahead and get started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get kind of as close as I can to her, like maybe right here when she kind of looked at me. We'll talk about thresholds in another episode. And I'm just going to lay the feed pan down. And then when she's looking at me even, I'm going to click and then deliver the food reward, and then step back is the key. You want to step back because otherwise they're not going to feel comfortable enough to come up and take the food. And then eventually what's going to happen is that you don't have to take that step back, and you can just stay at the feed pan. Okay, so as soon as she looked at me there, and even right there, okay, then that's when I'm going to click and treat. So you don't necessarily even have to use the target this phase, but I'll kind of show you guys how I would weave that in as well. But just getting that eye contact, getting them to face up like we would in the round pen with negative reinforcement, good. But using the click and treat instead of that release of pressure and the comfort, okay? Now there is a certain degree of releasing pressure during this though, right? Because I had to step back and give her space. That's actually that release of mental pressure, all right? So it's still really important when you're using the positive reinforcement in the clicker training to be aware of how pressure is going to apply. Now, this is a really good exercise for Mystic too, because she's still getting used to the camera. So you can see her kind of checking it out. So what I might do is ask her to come towards me, but a little bit closer. And she's like, oh, this feed pan seems a little bit safer than getting close up by the camera, right? So once she looks at me again, I'm going to click, but she's not looking at me yet. And you can influence this by kind of moving around, right? So like right there when I kind of step towards her. Now when she didn't come to me, I'll say, okay, that's fine. I'll just go ahead and throw your treat in the feed pan, okay? Now I go over in more detail what food to use and really how to start the clicker training in my membership library of training videos if you guys are interested. But as far as the food rewards that I'm using, most of the time it's just going to be some form of hay pellets. So it'll kind of depend on the horse and how much motivation that they need. But I really want her, I don't want to be the only resource for the food that she's getting. So I'm not going to be using like a really high sugary treat unless I'm using a lot of counter conditioning, which we'll talk about later. But basically if they've had a really negative association with something and or I really need to use kind of their jackpot favorite kind of reward. Okay, so let's see if I can get her to look. Good, and then there she was kind of coming towards me, so I might go towards her and deliver the treat. But again, if she wasn't comfortable, I would just throw it in the feed pan. Okay, there she looked again. And see how I got a step that time? So what you want to do, Okay, so still a little reactive. Using the feed pan is also another way to keep yourself safe. She's not going to feel a lot of need to go into fight right now because she can go into flight very easily, and that is going to be her primary method of choice, as most horses. But of course, if I needed to use a boundary with her, like a protected contact or a barrier between us, and using the feed pan are a few ways I can keep us both safe. Okay, so there she looked at me, and then I'll go ahead and throw the food again. But what I was going to start talking about with you guys is that what I could do next, once you have the horse looking at you, is try to get a few steps forward like she just gave. So it's going to start with them just looking, and then maybe even a shift of weight towards you, and then maybe a foot, and then 2 feet, and then several steps until they start regularly approaching you. Okay. And she's kind of come up, like I said, right away, although she's still a little timid, okay? But that means you'll just, you can work at greater distances than maybe what she's showing me if you're working on this with a horse who's hard to catch in a big open field. But ideally, you could introduce the target to them too in an area where, you have a closer distance with them as well. Now to get that step towards me, what I might do is move my body back, right? And kind of draw her in that way. And then as soon as I get 1 or 2 steps, click and treat that. Okay. And then she was feeling a little uncomfortable again. That's fine. I'm just going to let her leave there. And then maybe we'll go back to working kind of near the feed pan. Okay, so when she's not kind of looking at me, I'm just either going to ignore her or kind of come into her space just a little bit so that maybe she wants to check me out. And as soon as she starts turning towards me, click and treat that. Okay, good. So again, as a prerequisite for this exercise, it is going to be helpful if they know what this handheld target means and they know to touch it, and when they touch it, good things happen. That's going to definitely help with your catching. But if I was using the clicker training for a horse who didn't even know what the target was at first, I'd probably just use my body and then slowly weave the target in. Because again, I can influence her kind of looking towards me by stepping towards kind of her personal space to right on the edge where she kind of goes to check me out and say, what are you doing there? And kind of looks at me. Okay, maybe draw her forward a few steps again. Good. Good. See if we can go maybe up towards the camera just a hair in a second. Once she looks at me, I'll present the target. That's actually her thinking and considering. It's not her just being uninterested. Good. Okay. And maybe see how she's wanting to back away. So when she stayed in this area up by the camera, maybe I'll try to click and treat before she decides to take off and say, hey, this is a pretty good place to be. Okay. So if I were in the round pen, like we talked about earlier, the technique would be that when they are focused on you, it's a place of rest. See how my body drew her back there? And all of the pressure is off of them. And for this, our reward is more the click and treat, okay, the positive reinforcement. And again, I go over how to hand feed and everything like that in my membership videos, because it is important if you start positive reinforcement training that you teach your horse not to mug you for treats, okay? And she's actually there. That was interesting. So she's trying, right there, she didn't really want to be in this area, but she also did one of her other maneuvers that she usually gets reinforced for, which is the back up. I've been teaching her to back up. So she was like, oh, let me pull that card and see if I get reinforced for that. And I'm just going to say, no, just stand quietly and you'll get reinforced there. Okay, good. And then maybe when I touch you. Okay, now she's gotten a lot better since I started working with her just about going up and touching her. One of the things I want to look at when I go to touch her is that she's not flinching at all. See how her skin was soft? But in the beginning, my click was a little late there. I wanted to click right the moment I was touching her. But in the past, when I would go to touch her, she'd shiver every time. There was always a little bit of a shiver. So the fact that is getting out now is really important, because a lot of times horses are uneasy about being caught too if they've already been handled, is because they don't really feel good about being touched, or what comes after you getting them out, or maybe they don't feel good about getting haltered, or maybe it's the riding that they don't feel good about and what happens after they get caught. Okay, so that's something I've been working on, is just expanding touch with her and making sure that I can touch her and it's not causing her any fear. So that's a little bit about how to get her focused out in the big field, going out and getting your first connection with your horse using positive reinforcement, if you have a horse who's normally hard to catch. And in our next training session that we do in the next episode, I'll talk about the next phase, which is haltering, but we won't get quite there in this episode. I think that we'll leave it at that. And so again, I have more step-by-step videos in the membership library if you're interested. And if you want to start the positive reinforcement training, it's really important to go about it in a way that your horse is balanced and staying patient around the food and learns food manners. That's the biggest reason people have not found success using the clicker training. So teaching something I call treat receiving mode and other behaviors are going to be really important as you dive in on this journey with your horse if you're interested in starting. So what we're going to do to end the session, because kind of the next phase would be the haltering, right? Is we'll cover that in the next episode, but now I need to end the session. So with positive reinforcement, it's really important that I'm going to end the session kind of in a special way, because I don't want this to end up as punishment, okay? Meaning negative punishment, meaning I'm taking away something like her favorite toy, okay? Because remember, the negative is just a subtraction sign, basically. So negative punishment would be you end the session really abruptly. So notice how I asked her to target or do a behavior, then I'm going to click, and then I'm going to leave her with food there, giving her kind of a jackpot, again, just the hay pellets there. And that way I can leave, and it functions as this end of session signal. So throughout my sessions with Mystic, even if we don't always show it on camera, that is how I'm going to be ending the session. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and head back up to the house. I want to talk to you guys about a few more things about positive reinforcement and exploring what's possible. So let's go back up and have a cup of tea as we discuss that. Alright, so hopefully you guys enjoyed that training session with Mystic. What I want to talk to you guys about now is kind of understanding and the importance of understanding the motivation. So we talked earlier about the different methods that we can use to get a horse to face up, get that connection, and help with the catching process. And we talked about methods using positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Now, I really think that each has their purpose. So my message is not that negative reinforcement is bad and that we should avoid it. Really quite the opposite. Horses need to learn to respond to pressure and think through it and respond versus react. But I do see so many benefits of using positive reinforcement. And with that, I think that it's important to understand to differentiate between what's the motivation and what's my perspective. And here's what I mean. So I have heard some trainers in the past, maybe doing a demo or something, and they're talking about teaching how to get the horse to face up. They're in the round pen. They're using negative reinforcement techniques. Fine, cool, right? But how they're explaining it, I think, can cause some confusion. So how they explain it is that the horse is hooking on to them, joining up with them, coming in to begin a partnership with the person, and that they want the horse's motivation to be coming in to build a partnership rather than coming in for a nibble of food. So I've heard it put that way quite a few times. And I used to say the same thing myself as well. But now that I've learned the science behind motivation and what our horses do, I realize that the horse coming in to build a partnership with us is really a perspective that we put on the motivation. So when we're using negative reinforcement, what's happening is that the horse feels pressure, whether it's mental or physical, from being around the outside of the round pen. So unless they're facing up to us, or they have to face up to us in order to stop feeling the mental pressure of asking them to send out and move their feet, or the physical pressure even of a rope tapping them and flinging at them and things like that, okay? So they're learning that the human is this safe place, this place of comfort, all right? So that's the motivation. But then again, the perspective we put on it is the horse is looking to me for a partnership. Is that right or wrong? Not necessarily. That perspective could be totally valid to someone, but there's a difference between perspective and the fact of motivation. So when we're talking about the fact of motivation, we're talking about a universal law. We're talking about, if I were to take my hat off right now, which I'm not going to do to show you guys my crazy hair, but if I were to do that, I would take my hat off, and if I were to drop it, whether I believe in gravity or I don't, whether I believe in that law or I don't, the hat is going to drop to the floor, right? Now, I could put all kinds of different perspectives on that, but there's this underlying law of gravity that whether I believe in it or not, it's still functioning, and I can choose how well I want to take advantage of it, if I know and understand it. It's the same thing with our horses and what motivates them. So negative reinforcement, it's a law. So you could also put a perspective on clicker training a horse to face up, saying that they're looking for a partnership, right? So when Mystic starts looking to me and starts hooking on using the clicker training, I could say, okay, now she's coming in and looking for a partnership. She's looking to work with me. She's looking to engage. She's looking to get reinforced and figure out, okay, what do I need to do now to get reinforced? And so we're building a partnership. Okay, totally valid. That's a perspective, but it's not the underlying motivation. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys, of not confusing motivation with perspective, because it's the better that we understand motivation, the more success we're going to be finding with our horses, and the better we're going to be able to give them rewards that matter to them. So I think that using the perspective and the perspective only to describe why a horse is coming in can be misleading. Right? So it can be misleading whether I'm talking about it with negative or positive reinforcement about what the motivation actually is. Now, the cool thing about positive reinforcement is that there's quite a few advantages of motivating your horse from that aspect, whether you're working on catching or any other behavior. So here's why. First of all, positive reinforcement is pretty neat because it can increase what's called discretionary effort. So discretionary effort is the level of effort that someone puts out that isn't required but goes above and beyond expectations. So with horses and humans, we see an increase in discretionary effort when we're using positive reinforcement, when they're working towards something they want to acquire versus something they want to avoid. So because of that, the model of positive reinforcement is actually expanding to a lot of businesses who see that the productivity of people increases when the employees are motivated by positive reinforcement. Now, with negative reinforcement, we see the opposite. There's actually a decrease in discretionary effort because people, horses, animals will do the bare minimum to get by, to avoid what they don't want to happen. Now, what can also happen with negative reinforcement is that the animal or person can do the behavior with a little bit of underlying tones of resentment, because their motivation for doing it is to get away from something that they don't want to experience, an aversive stimulus. Now, another cool thing about positive reinforcement is that I think that it really kind of builds more of a pathway for intrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is when someone does something just because it feels good to do it. Whereas I think using negative reinforcement can kind of block intrinsic motivation from forming. So if you think about you want to motivate your partner to take the trash out, all right? So let's use that example. If you're motivating them through positive reinforcement, here's what it would look like. It would look like they take the trash out. When they do, maybe you write them a thank you note and you just really express your appreciation in some way, their love language. Express your appreciation for them just really helping you out and supporting you, and just how much gratitude you have for that and how much it means to you. So that would be the positive reinforcement. And then what happens is that eventually your partner could develop this intrinsic motivation where they're like, it feels good to not just to be appreciated, but to be of service to someone and to be able to support someone you love. That feels good inside of me. So that's intrinsic motivation. So you can see how positive reinforcement kind of opens the doors for that. Now, I feel like with negative reinforcement, it can be a little bit of a block for the intrinsic motivation to occur, because when you're using negative reinforcement, going back to our example, it would be like you nag your spouse over and over and over, and in order to get the nagging, the aversive stimulus to stop, the partner finally takes out the trash. And that's when also we can see kind of this level of discretionary effort go down. They do the bare minimum, maybe feel a little bit of resentment doing it. And then that kind of blocks the pathway for intrinsic motivation to form. So that's a little bit on realizing what the motivation is for doing a behavior, whether it's with our animals or with people. So my challenge for you guys, and your question of the day for the comments below, is to tell us about a behavior that you want a partner, significant other, employee, coworker, child, whatever it is, something that you would like them to do, and how maybe you've used negative reinforcement in the past, and how you could take those tones of or else out, and how you could instead use positive reinforcement, and do a little experiment. And I would be curious to see, actually, after about a week or so of trying it, what changes for you. It's pretty cool to see what happens when we kind of realize what the underlying motivation is and try to make sure that there's really something in it for the person, and just expressing our gratitude and appreciation. I think it's pretty powerful. So anyways, comment below and let me know, what is the behavior you're wanting the human to do, and what's a way that you could use positive reinforcement instead of negative reinforcement like maybe you have in the past. So let me know what that is. And I will see you guys on the next episode. In the next episode, we are going to take a look at kind of the next phase of catching or building that connection, which is haltering. And after this episode, you probably won't see me work with the halter very much, but I really wanted to include it because, first of all, I have a really neat way of going about teaching, for example, a wild horse or a horse who has some negative connotations about the halter, how to teach the haltering process and create some feel-good emotions about it. And also, the haltering process was a major pain point for me of frustration with Mystic, where I felt like I was just really stuck and I was frustrated, and it was like every day the halter was this new thing she had never seen before, and I couldn't figure it out. until I did figure it out. And I'm going to share with you guys what I learned, what message we should be getting from our frustration, and how to use something called the process of shaping and approximations to guide our horses through that frustration into understanding. So that's what to expect in the next episode. Make sure you hit the subscribe button below if you haven't already, and the little bell next to it if you want to be sure to be notified when the next episode is released. And then finally, if you want to learn about Mystic's journey in even more detail and more about positive reinforcement and how to integrate that into the work with your horse, then the Academy membership is a great step for you to take with your horsemanship journey. I would love to be your coach on there. So if you're interested in that, I've included the link below. And then finally, if this episode resonated for you guys, please take a screenshot, share it with someone that you think would benefit from it. I would love for your help in getting this message out to more people and changing the world for our horses. And with that, I will see you guys in the next episode. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you soon.